Tzfat. I want to apologize. I was about 8 or 10 minutes into my talk, and the computer seemed to have died all of a sudden, so I don't know whether or not you're hearing this. I hope that you are. And if you heard the first one, well, it was a nice introduction to my introduction. So I'll just tell you that this is our Thursday night mini Verbringen. For those who want to know what a Verbringen is, I hope that if you've been to Tzfat, you certainly enjoyed Verbringens. Verbringen is something for all Jews, and yet we'll call it, let's say, a Chassidic celebration. It's a style of Chassidim, not only to celebrate when we celebrate, but also learn when we celebrate, to sing, to be joyful. So we have these events on a regular basis, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily, depends who you are, where you are. But there's Verbringens going on all over the world, where we sit and we learn together, and we sing together, and we discuss, and we schmooze, we comment, and we criticize each other if necessary on a really nice basis. If somebody has a little bit of a problem, sometimes we have to do that, heaven forbid. And so this is our weekly 8:30 Thursday night Verbringen from Tzfat through Ascent, by virtue of Ascent. And I wanted to just tell you that 8:30 in Tzfat, in Israel, is, let me just check this, it's about 1:30 p.m. in New York, 10:30 a.m. Los Angeles, and 3:30 in Australia. Yeah, for all of those who want to hear my Australian accent, now you've heard it. Okay, so Verbringen is celebration. I want to tell you, I think, a beautiful story, But let me go back first. I was mentioning on my previous presentation, which I think has been lost to the world now, I was mentioning on that presentation that the Alter Rebbe, 7 generations ago, the first Rebbe of Chabad, wrote a magnificent book, a book that we refer to constantly, both for our learning and our understanding and so on, of what God is, of what the cosmos is, what's the relationship between the sun, the moon, the stars, and this little Jew here sitting here in Tzfat, why we love each other, what's hate, what's depression, all those things the Alter Rebbe looks at and discusses for us. One of the things that he makes very clear in Tanya, and this wonderful book called Tanya, and I should tell you, by the way, if Tanya is a little too difficult to get started with, then there's another magnificent book also written here in Tzfat in recent times called GPS for the Soul, which is a modernly worded explanation of those things written in Tanya. So GPS for the Soul and or Tanya, great way to start if you're looking at your Judaism, if you're looking at Chassidic ideas, then I commend both of those to you. So in Tanya, and of course in GPS for the Soul, the Alter Rebbe explains that a Jew has, we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, 2 souls. Yep. What are those 2 souls? And I think you'll find this interesting. We have 2 souls. One is called the Nefesh Behema, which is the animal soul. A behema is an animal, like a cow. And the other is the Nefesh Elokit, the godly soul. And I just want to say, before we get started too far into this, L'chaim, L'chaim, we've got a little vodka here to celebrate the fact that we're together with our fellow Jews and we're learning together. And of course, the coming of the period of Rosh Hashanah, which is only about 3 weeks away, the Jewish New Year. It should be a wonderful time for all of us. We should all be written in the good book, as they say, and only have good news for each other. So L'chaim, L'chaim. I'm going to say the blessing again, even though I said it before, because I'm not sure if that got recorded. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya bidvoro. So what am I doing when I say this blessing before having the drink, thanking God? Okay, so what am I doing? It's like this. I'm thirsty and I want to celebrate us being together, the unification of friends getting together and discussing stuff with an open mind, with an open heart, with an open spirit. When I do that, sometimes I like to have a little drink, right? And so I could say I'm thirsty, or I'm not really thirsty. I just have a little desire to uplift myself a little bit with some vodka, right? So what is that? That's my nefesh behema. That's my animal soul saying, Benjamin, you'd like a little drink. Yeah. I'm just about to sip it, and along comes my nefesh elokit, my godly soul, and says, wait a second, Benjamin. You have two souls. There's the animal soul, the nefesh behema, but there's also the godly soul. Don't forget your godly soul, mate. Here you are, you're taking a drink. You're receiving a great deal of pleasure from enjoying one of God's great creations. You should thank God for it. You should put it into a spiritual realm instead of just taking a drink and not recognizing where it came from, who gave it to you. So for this reason, not only do we look at it and say, well, I'm looking forward to drinking this, but we also say a bracha, a blessing. So I said the bracha to thank God. Now I'm going to take another sip, and then I'll put the vodka down. I have a lovely story to tell tonight, and I hope you'll enjoy it. And again, as we said before, it would be wonderful if you'd make comments, if you care to make comments, or positive or questioning or discussion. Please make comments. We're going to be here for a little bit over half an hour, I would think. And I'd really appreciate knowing that you're there. So even if you just say hi to Benjamin, I'd really like that. It would help to uplift my spirit. Okay, so a wonderful story about a character that some of you may or may not have heard of. And you may think, well, I don't associate him with Chabad or with even with serious Judaism. But a very interesting story, and it's told in this man's biography. His name is a wonderful character back in the 1930s and 40s. His name was Zalman Shazar. Right? Now, Zalman Shazar, if you know of him, you possibly heard that he was a minister in the government here in Israel back in the 1940s, in the early governments of Israel, that he was also the third president of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel. So what's special about Zalman Shazar? Those who hear his name might get a clue. Zalman Shazar has its deep connections to Chassidus. So Zalman Shazar lived, I believe, in Eastern Europe, and he was very, very close to his beloved grandfather, who lived, I believe, in the city of Mir. So his grandfather was a very religious man, or what we might call a frum man, a practicing Jew in every respect. And he was also close to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is going back into, as I said, into the 1940s, 30s and 40s. His grandson, Zalman Shazar, loved him very dearly. And they would get together a few times a year. They didn't live in the same city as each other. They get together a couple of times a year, and they would have Shabbos together, Shabbat together, and they would celebrate, and they would do, what do we call it? Verbring. They would have a verbringen together, and sometimes they'd sit up till very, very late in the night or early in the morning, talking Jewish ideas, talking about Zionism, the potential for a creation of a Jewish state, which was coming in a few years from now, and various ideas, and they had many disagreements. Right? Zalman Shazar's grandfather had the traditional view that the state for the Jewish people would be re-established after thousands of years when Mashiach, when the Messiah arrives and brings about the establishment of the state. There were others who looked around the world and said, we need a Jewish state now, right? Back in the 1940s, and of course this is just a few years after the Hitler atrocities, much more, and the Jews were essentially wanderers all over the world, and we didn't have a home of our own. Now, it's not because of that, but that was one of the catalysts that brought about the eventual creation of the modern state of Israel. Zalman Shazar was a passionate Zionist, a young man who loved the concept of a Jewish state, and loved Israel, loved the Jewish people, loved his grandfather, and they, as I said, they had a bit of a conflict about how the state may eventually come about. Zalman Shazar was not only a follower, but a close, fan of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of the modern state of Israel. Okay, so they're living, the grandfather's living in I forgot the name of the place, in Mir, the city of Mir. And the grandson decides he's going to make Aliyah. What's making Aliyah? Come to live in Israel. This was a year or two, I think, before the creation of the state. I think it was probably 1947. I'm not certain of that, but I think it was 47. I think it was before the state existed in modern times. So Zalman decides that he better visit his beloved grandfather. Perhaps if he's going off to Palestine, to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, perhaps they'll never meet again. I believe they never met again. So he goes to have his final Shabbat with his grandfather. And they sit and they have a lovely Shabbat dinner, as I said, and they talked late into the night, and they sang, and they just enjoyed themselves. You know, it's a sad thing when you know that you're probably seeing somebody that you love for the last time. Unlike their previous Verbrennens, on this particular occasion, they didn't argue. Right? They were too respectful of the situation that they might never see each other again. And so these difficulties, these distant things didn't come up. But what they did talk about was deep ideas of Chassidut, of Jewish spirituality. And one of the things that the grandfather did was he taught Zalman a good number of Niggunim. We heard, I think Rabbi Mo today mentioned Niggunim. Niggunim being songs of Judaism, but mostly without the words. And the idea of a Niggun is that it can uplift the spirit, it can uplift your soul just by humming along. And I won't bore you by humming anything at the moment. Okay, they have the Verbrengen. On the Sunday morning, young Zalman has to go to the ship. He's leaving Europe to come to Eretz Yisrael. His grandfather says, I'll come with you to the port. They're going to the ship in the nearby harbour. They accompany each other to the port, and it's a very emotional time. They, as I said, they know they're probably never going to meet again. And it's a very holy time. We Jews, when we say goodbye to each other, we actually never say goodbye. We always look forward to seeing you again. And sometimes we know in a realistic sense, we might not see this person ever again. Okay, so they go to the port. They've got a horse and a wagon. They get to the port. They get out of the wagon. And as Zalman lifts his grandfather out of the wagon, his grandfather does what my rabbi did when I left Sydney 18 years ago. My rabbi said to me, you know, we don't say goodbye to each other, Benjamin. We don't say goodbye. When two Jews part, we don't say goodbye. He said, what we do is we leave each other with some thoughts of Torah. Pardon me, some Jewish learning. So what did the grandfather say to Zalman? He said, Zalman, in our lives, we're very much affected by our surroundings. And one of the things within our surroundings that affects us is the nigunim that we hear. Yeah, not only the songs with their beautiful words, but the beauty of nigunim and how a nigun, a tune, can uplift the spirit, how it can make you feel higher, closer to Hashem, put yourself in a mood of Kodesh, of holiness. Zalman Shazar says there are a number of different styles of nigunim. There's the song that you hear, or the niggun that you hear, has no particular effect on you. It comes and it goes and it's gone. And you pretty much forget it. Then there's a niggun that you hear it once, and all of a sudden, sometime later, you keep hearing it in your memory, but you can't quite grasp it. You can't quite grab the atmosphere of when that niggun was sung. You can't quite return to enjoying the niggun. It won't come to you, and it worries you. Gosh, I remember that song we sang 3 weeks ago, and you just can't remember it. But then there's another type of niggun. Yeah, it's a deep Chassidic idea. Another type of niggun, and that is that many of us experience at some stage in our lives a song or a niggun that has such an effect on our soul that we reach out for it every time that we're in need of being uplifted. Sometimes we reach out for it when we're very sad. Other times we reach out for this niggun when we're very happy. And other times just when we're doing something important in our lives and we're sort of thinking, God help me, Hashem, please be there to support me. And what do we do? How do we reach a feeling that we're connecting with the Holy One, blessed be He? We do it sometimes by humming a niggun, by hearing this niggun in our heads. One of the niggunim that they sang on that night, on the Friday night, when the grandfather met for the last time with Zalman Shazar, something called Keliato. Keliato is a song of praise for God, and it's sung certainly in many synagogues around the world, not just Chabad songs, although it was written by the Alter Rebbe about 300 years ago, but it's sung in many shuls around the world, and it's sung especially at the end of Hallel, the prayer of Hallel, which we say on holidays and various other times. And Hallel itself is a whole stack of praises of Hashem, and it finishes up with this niggun. I will sing a little bit of it so that you'll recognize it. It goes something like this. Keli ata beyadeka adai ya da 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 ya da ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da. Beautiful tune. Okay, it's called Keliata or Eliata, talking about God. So anyhow, Zalman Shazar is saying goodbye to his grandfather. The grandfather tells him about there's going to be one niggun in your life that you want to hang on to, that will be your special spiritual hook, if you like, to grab hold of the Holy One, blessed be He, and to feel uplifted and also to be guided in the right direction. Zalman gets on the boat and he finds his way to Palestine, what was then Palestine. They get off the ship in the coastline. They're brought into the land by a group of kibbutznik people who are already settled in Eretz HaKodesh, and he makes a life. Years later, he writes in his biography, and this is the point of the story. He writes, I remember this wonderful night when I spent with my grandfather, the last time I ever saw him. And much has happened in my life since then. My grandfather told me that there would be one niggun that I would not be able to let go, that would always be there to support me, to look after me, to take care of me, and to bring me into a spiritual mood. I have such a niggun from that night that we were together, a niggun that is so haunting that every time I need a niggun, or every time I feel that I need support, or every time that I need this uplifting, even if I'm depressed, or even the opposite when I'm especially happy, I keep reaching back and in my mind, and sometimes I sing it out loud, but certainly it's there in my head, and it never leaves me alone. He said, when I came to the land of Israel and I ran across the shallow waves onto the beach, and we all reached down onto the sand and kissed the soil of Eretz Israel. He said, the niggun that was in my brain, we'll come to it in a minute. He said, sometime later, when I got married on a kibbutz in Eretz Israel, when I'm standing there under the chuppah and connecting not only with my new wife, but also connecting in a deep way with God, again, this niggun came to my brain, came to my head, and I couldn't let it go. Later on, I was elected to the Knesset. Once the new state was established, I was elected to the Knesset. And when I was appointed as education minister, I stood there with a chumash of 5 books of Moses to swear that I'll be true to the land and to the country and to God. And he said, what was in my brain? What was the overwhelming feeling I had in my brain? The same niggun, the same tune. And then, of course, when he became education minister and then he became president, he said, when I stood there again, being sworn in as president, I couldn't get this niggun out of my head. It was there to support me and to love me. What was that niggun? It was Keliata. Some years later, Zalman Shazar was in New York, came to New York, and he came as president of the state of Israel to visit New York. And when he arrived in New York, he said to his minders, he was there just for a few days, and he said to his minders, I dearly want to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? I'm one sort of leader of the Jewish people, and he's the other sort of leader, right? The leader of Judaism in the world, said Zalman Shazar. And I'm quoting him now from his biography. He said, I so dearly would love to meet the Rebbe. So he said to his minders, can you arrange it? So they give a call to 770, the headquarters of Chabad, and they arrange that, they speak to Rebbe Chadakov, who was one of the secretaries of the Rebbe. And Rebbe Chadakov said, no, what's so special? I said, well, we're calling on behalf of Zalman Shazar, the new president of the state of Israel, and he wants to meet the Rebbe. Rebbe Chadakov goes away, he talks to the Rebbe, he comes back, and he says, the Rebbe will decide what to do in a day or two. And then Zalman Shazar says to his minders, wait a second, I'm the new president of the state. And here we have the world leader in Judaism. I wonder if I should go to meet him or if he should come to meet me out of respect. Being the president, should he come to whatever the hotel was, the Waldorf Astoria or wherever they were? So they passed this question on to Rabbi Chadakov, that they weren't sure, they didn't mean to be disrespectful, but they weren't sure what the protocol was. Should Zalman Shazar come to the Rebbe or should the Rebbe come to meet him? Zalman Shazar said, I'll put the question to the Rebbe, we'll come back to you. They didn't get back for a whole 24 hours, and eventually they came back. And they said, the Rebbe would love to meet Mr. Shazar. Could he please come to 770, to the headquarters of Chabad, to meet with the Rebbe? And Mr. Shazar was perfectly happy with that. The next day, Zalman Shazar comes in his best suit and tie, and a little bowler hat, and he comes to meet the Rebbe. And the Rebbe came actually out of the building to greet him, to shake his hand when he got out of the car, walked him inside, and they spent, I think, something between 1 and 2 hours together in a private audience. As over the years, so many Jewish leaders came to meet the Rebbe and to seek his advice and to seek his direction. So Mr. Shazar goes in to speak to the Rebbe, and they have a long, long conversation. Eventually the Rebbe says, would you like to see where the previous Rebbe, my father-in-law, lived? Mr. Shazar, again, according to his biography, said, I'd be delighted. So the Rebbe takes him up one flight of stairs to where his father-in-law used to live, where he used to teach, where he used to write letters, from where the whole world knew of the previous Rebbe. And he showed him, this is where he ate, this is where he slept, this is where he was cooked for, this is where he learned. Zalman Shazar was overwhelmed to be in that place at that time. They came back down to the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe was going to wish Mr. Shazar goodbye. Mr. Shazar said to him, Rebbe, can I ask you one question, please? And he said, certainly. He said, why did it take a whole day or more for you to decide whether you would meet me or I would meet you? Whether you would come to my hotel or whether I would come to visit you? The Rebbe said, I wasn't sure what to do in this case. So I went to my father-in-law's grave, where he used to go every day, except for Shabbos, every day to pray and to seek advice from his father-in-law. He went to the grave of the previous Rebbe, and he asked God, but he needed to be directed. What should I do? What's the proper thing to do? Should I go out and greet the President of the State of Israel, or should he come to me? He said to Zalman Shazar, he said, I had to wait until I could feel there was some sort of answer from my father-in-law. And when I felt that answer came, the answer was that it would be better if you would come to greet me at 7:30. It happened that Zalman Shazar went a good number of times to visit Lubavitcher Rebbe, and if you look on videos of the Rebbe, you'll be able to see that there are a number of times that Zalman Shazar actually came and he was the Rebbe's guest at Fabrengens at 770. Says Zalman Shazar in his biography, the highlight of my life was to shake hands with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said, and I was reminded and uplifted every time that I would come to 770, which was a number of times over the years, and I'd go to Fabrengens, and every time the Rebbe would stop when he would see me there in the crowd or when he would invite me in, and they would always sing Keliato. So I'm going to leave you now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I hope that this has been an interesting story. I'm sorry about the mix-up technologically at the beginning. As I've said every week, if anybody can advise me on the technology of making videos and how to turn this on and that off, I'd be very happy to hear from you. Whether you do or not, have a wonderful Shabbos. This is Shabbat Shoftim. It's about judges and policemen that we're talking about in the parsha this week. I thank you for spending time with me this week. With somewhat croaky throat, I didn't know if we'd get there this week, but we did it, Baruch Hashem. I look forward to seeing you again this time next week and to bringing with you again. I bring you greetings from the people of Tzfat and certainly from the management and the teachers at Ascent. We look forward to welcoming you back in Tzfat again. And if you come to Tzfat soon, please, when you want to stay over at Ascent, tell them that you'd like to eat at the Alexanders. We'd love to have you as guests on Friday night or at any other time, particularly Friday night. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. L'chaim, l'chaim, and may you be blessed. May we all be blessed to be written in 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, in the book of life. Our lives should be full of joy. Our lives should be full of success. And we should all seek out that Niggun. Yes, seek out that song that lifts us up and carry it with us as a special connection to our spirituality. L'chaim, l'chaim. Good night. Shabbat shalom. See you next week.